Welcome back, everyone. It's been way too long since we've worked on the project boat, so that's what we're going to do today. I'd like to start working on the electrical system. I think we're ready to get the starting battery in the battery compartment in the back and get that hooked up to the outboard, and get the trolling motor battery hooked up in the front compartment. I'd like to get all that wired into the onboard charger and get that installed. And then we might even be able to start running some wires to the console. I left most of the existing wiring in. I think it's still good, so I'd like to use some of that and start putting in the fuse panel, connecting all that, and then running it up front so that we can start, figuring out where we want our switches for the bilge pump and any other electronics that we're gonna have on there. Still debating if we're gonna do a fish finder. It might be fun to put one in at the console and wire that in as well. So mostly electrical work today. We'll see how much we can get done. All right, so here's our 2-bank charger that we're going to install. And I've got my fuse panel that I'm thinking we'll probably put underneath the console, sort of in a out of the way but easy to access place. And then I've got some heavier gauge battery wire and some 14 gauge marine wire for everything else. And then we'll see if we can find some places that we want to put our battery trays. Okay, so back here in the battery compartment, I took a little time to lay everything out, make sure it fit where I wanted and where it made the most sense. So I put the onboard charger against the compartment wall over there. I'm going to run one of the battery leads coming around the side here, and the battery is actually going to be on this side in this back corner. My thinking there is that I should put the battery on the opposite side as the driver's seat. So if you're out in the boat by yourself, you should hopefully try to, balance it a little bit. With this being a smaller aluminum boat, I'm sure there's going to be some listing depending on where the person is standing. So try to, balance that as much as I can, keep some of the weight on the passenger side. And then that battery is going to be connected, and then here is where I'm going to end up putting the fuel tank. So I made sure that fits. We'll mount that probably towards the end, just so it's not in the way of doing some other wiring. The other battery that this is going to charge is the trolling motor battery, and that's in one of the forward compartments. The power wire for that is actually here, and it's running through the center channel up to the front of the boat, and it comes out right here. And then there's my battery tray for that battery, so we'll be able to power the trolling motor from here. Again, trying to balance some of the weight. I figured both batteries in the back might be a little much for a aluminum boat, so I'm bringing this weight a little bit forward to hopefully keep it sitting as level as possible. And then I have a green pull wire there that I fished through before I did some more finishing of the deck, just to have it in place. And I can pull my new power wire along where the green wire is, and then it actually comes out right here, and that is going to power the trolling motor. Okay, so I mounted a block of wood under our console here and painted it white. I'm going to attach our fuse panel to that. So while we're letting it dry, I'm actually going to start running some wires from the back battery compartment up here to the console, using the pull wires that we put in before we did our deck finishing. So let's see how hard it's going to be to actually fish some of these wires through. Well, that was a big failure. I ended up breaking both of my pull wires that I had ran prior to finishing the deck. I guess the angle coming through the floor and then turning up to here was probably just too sharp. I tried for who knows how long, pulling back and forth to get it to go around that bend, and it just wouldn't work. So they both broke, so I had to just pull the wire out, and I'm back at square one. I think what I'm going to end up doing is running these wires along the top through the channel that the steering cables run on, because those actually go on top from the console to the back as well. The boat came with some aluminum track, let's say, for lack of a better term. So I'm going to put that up just so you get an idea what I'm talking about, and I'll show you what plan B is. Alright, so I put the console back where it goes, and then I added in these pieces that came with the boat. This is kind of like a track that runs along the side to the back, and it houses the steering cables that connect to the wheel, and then I guess it also would house the throttle cable. This box here is where the throttle gets mounted, and then that probably supposed to run back through this hole and then to the back. So I will probably use this channel now for my electrical from the fuse block on the console. I'm gonna find some waterproof conduit of some kind that I'll just run along there, and then I'll have to come up with a clean way of getting from the back corner into the battery compartment. It's not ideal, it wasn't my first plan, but that's how it goes sometimes. Didn't really have any other options after I broke both of those pull wires, so that's what we'll do. We'll go to plan B. It should still come out nice. Shouldn't be any loss of functionality or any major risks with that. It'll just, you know, be a little bit less clean than I expected, but honestly, with that channel there, you probably won't notice it. And hey, it'll be easier to run wires in the future, so that's a plus. Alright, so we're here in the garage. I've got my channel piece and the part that the throttle attaches to. I don't know what you would call that, like a throttle box or something. But I'm going to carpet both of these before I actually install them on the boat. I thought about leaving them like a clean aluminum look, but I think it's just going to get too hot and you're going to end up trying to rest your hand on that while you're driving the boat. In the middle of summer, it's just going to be too hot for exposed metal. So I'm going to carpet it. I think it was originally carpeted, and I do have enough extra carpet, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to see how I can get the carpet glue to stick to this. Hopefully it's not too difficult. And once we get these wrapped and the carpet dry, we'll go ahead and look at installing these on the boat. Alright, so we have our starting battery in the boat now, and one of the first things we're going to do is connect the onboard charger to our starting battery, as well as our trolling motor battery that goes up there. So in order to do that, because I want the trolling motor battery up front, I had to buy one of these extenders, and I think they require this because there's some temperature sensors in these charging cables from the onboard charger, and you can't just cut them and splice them with another wire, or I guess it takes away that functionality. So I was just gonna be good, follow the rules, spend a little bit extra money and get the actual extender. So it'll extend it 15 feet. That'll be enough to run from the onboard charger to the back up to the trolling motor battery in that front compartment. So I'm gonna run that up now, and then we can get both batteries connected and plug it in and make sure we have a good charge. Alright, that was easy enough. I've got my trolling motor battery in this front compartment, and I have the charging cable attached to the extender, and then here's the end, ran up, so it'll positive and negative will connect to that, and then we'll charge our trolling motor battery as well. And if we come back to the back, we've got our onboard charger on this side, and we would connect the other side of the positive and negative charging cable to our back starting battery. So both of them will be charged when we plug in the onboard charger. So here I've got my 4-gauge battery wire, positive, negative. I mean, they're just red and black, but it's nice to keep them separate, and so you know which one's positive and negative. I'd always recommend using red and black wire. Technically, it doesn't really matter. That's the same wire, but it's much easier to keep things organized. So anyways, we're going to take our 4-gauge wire. We're going to start back here, connect some battery ring terminals, and then we're going to run it through our conduit. Here's our waterproof conduit that we got. This is about where it's going to lay, and don't forget we're going to have that aluminum cover piece that I'm carpeting is going to be on top of it. But at least as a placeholder to see the distance and where we're going to connect everything, I have the conduit in here. So we're going to run the 4-gauge wire up to the console where it's going to plug in to the fuse panel, and then from there we can disseminate all the other wires. We'll probably do smaller 14-gauge and 16-gauge wire to connect our bilge pumps and switches at the console, things like that. So let's get this 4-gauge wire out and start doing some connectors and get it through this conduit we have here. Okay, so we fed our 4-gauge power wire, positive and negative, through our conduit from the back up to the front. These are going to attach to our fuse panel, which we are going to mount on that block that we've attached to the inside of our console. So that's going to be in there with a positive and negative from our main battery. This conduit I'm just going to tuck up underneath, and we'll attach it under the console. So that will be nice and clean. And then on this side, once we get that side panel in, we'll have to see how to do this. We can tuck this down in this corner, make it look as neat as we can. It's possible I might adjust this deck panel here. Maybe I'll cut it with a notch and fit this flat. We'll play around and see how we can get that to look nice and clean. But now that we've got the power wires in the battery compartment, we can actually measure off how much we need. We're going to install a battery switch. This is going to be the main kill switch. We'll put this somewhere in this general area. So the positive will come to here first and then back to the battery. So of course when you flip the switch, it interrupts that circuit and cuts power to the front console. So the next step, I suppose, we're going to cut these wires to the lengths that we need, and then we can actually start doing the terminations. We'll put some ring terminals on both sides to attach to here, whoops, to attach to the battery, and to attach to that fuse panel up under the console. All right, here under the front console, here's our main battery wires coming in our conduit from the back. Eventually these are going to be routed up underneath this lip, and they're going to come around to here where we're mounting our fuse panel. And then this fuse panel is what's going to power everything at the console. So I'm going to mount this on our wood block right here, and then we can go ahead and terminate the ends of our main power and connect it to the fuse panel. All right, there's our main battery wires connected to the negative bus and positive end of the fuse panel. This one that I purchased does have a negative bus included on it, so all of your negative wires would go on that side there closest to the black wire, and then all your positives are on this side next to the red wire, and then you've got a fuse slot for each one. So all my electronics are going to run off of this. Next, up front here in this front battery compartment, I'd like to run my 8-gauge wire from here up through where the foot pedal of the trolling motor is going to go. That's where the power connects. So I'm going to run that through. I have a fish wire that I ran before I did the deck. So I'm going to attach it to that, pull it through, and then we can terminate both ends of this power supply wire and get everything in place so that we can eventually get that trolling motor mounted. Alright, that was a nice easy run. Got my wires pulled through. So now I'm just going to terminate the ends of this with some ring terminals for the battery, and then that end is actually going to wait until the trolling motor is in place, because we're going to use some butt connectors and connect to the power wire that comes with the trolling motor. It comes off the foot pedal, so the foot pedal is going to go in that area. Of course, with this out of the way, foot pedal is probably going to go about here, and then that's going to wire in, and I'll probably feed it underneath just to get it out of the way. So we'll go ahead and do the ring terminals on this one, and then like I said, that one will probably wait till the trolling motor's in place. Alright, so here's the new switch panel that I'm going to use in the console up front. I'm going to install this hopefully just like that, as long as that existing hole is not too wide in that direction. That's what had the previous factory installed switch panel that I removed. So I'm going to try to extend this hole a little bit, make room for this guy. That should hopefully fit in nicely right there. And then we're going to connect it to power. Came with a little diagram here. Looks like both of those top two charging ports get a power wire coming from the battery. Well, in our case, it's going to come from that switch panel underneath into here, and then they both feed, each one feeds two switches below it, and then that runs to our components, mostly the bilge pump, the live well pump, and our navigation lights. So I'm going to try to get this hole opened up a bit and get this mounted. I think there's going to be plenty of accessibility behind it, so I'm not worried about connecting the wires to it just yet. But let's get it in place, and then we can run some power from the switch panel over to it, and then we can start running our wire back to our components. We're going to use some of this 14 gauge wire, run it back to our bilge pump and our live well aerator, at least to get started. Alright, switch panel is installed. Unfortunately, because of the existing size of the hole, I had to turn it this way. It wouldn't fit horizontal, which I kind of would have preferred, but this is fine. I think this looks nice. So we'll have the bilge pump, the live well pump, the nav lights, all connected in some order. I think I'll have an empty one left then, unless I come up with another electronic to add. But yeah, so that's ready to go. We can wire in the back as part of the next couple steps here. I think actually we're going to try to get the trolling motor in pretty soon here. So maybe we'll take a look at that next. Back at it today. We got the boat in the garage, hopefully to give me some more days working on it without worrying about any weather. We're still working on the electronics. I have my pairs of red and black ran from back to front in the conduit here. This is going to be for my live well pump, my bilge pump, and my navigation lights. So they're up in the front. Eventually they're going to go to the switch panel, and then they're going to go to the fuse box underneath. I think the first thing I'm going to do is actually connect those pairs to those pumps in the back. I'm actually waiting on the navigation light to come in. I bought one, but it's not here yet, so I'll connect that one last. So let's go ahead and get those connected. We'll do some inline connections with the wires that came from the pumps, and we'll do some heat shrink tubing on those as well. Okay, first up, I'm going to connect the bilge pump. Out of the box, the bilge pump has a black and a brown wire connected to it. This little tag here says that brown is positive. I'm not really sure why they use brown as positive instead of red, but they do. So I'm going to connect one pair of black to black and red to brown from the wire that I ran to the front. I'm going to use these little heat solder connections. There's supposed to be some adhesive and then some solder inside there. So not too familiar with these. I bought them to try, so we're going to see how they work. Give it a shot. Okay, first up, black to black. I think what I'm going to do is try to twist these together just a little bit, if I can. Like that. Maybe not quite hot enough. There we go. That's better. Okay, that's not bad. It's a little warped, it seems, but this glue melted and the solder started to melt. I was kind of worried I was going to melt the plastic, but it's pretty strong. I can't pull it apart. All right. There's one. Got a couple things in the mail today. Here is our navigation light for the back. I'm going to mount this probably in this general area here. I'm going to drill a hole, run power wire to it from inside the battery compartment, connect it here. It's going to go right next to this conduit that has all our wires going up to the console. I also bought some of these little wire hider things. I'm not sure if there's a technical name for these. Nylon marine wire mounts, I guess. So anyways, this is just going to hide the covering, or hide the opening to where our conduit goes. So I'm going to drill a hole in here, mount this, like I said, and we'll connect it down there. We already do have a power supply from the console back here. For that, it's going to be connected to one of our switches, so we'll be able to connect that. Also, within the same vein, I have some red and green LED navigation lights that are going to go at the front. So I'm going to do red and green, one on each side, as your traditional navigation lights go, on each side of the bow. And then we're going to run a power supply down the middle of the boat from the front to here, which is also going to connect to our fuse panel underneath, and then to our switch at the console, so that we can, when we flip that on, we'll flip on the navigation light and the front lights. All right, we've got the navigation light in. There's the port with the cover, 2 prongs down there. The light just slides in. Screws down. I wired in the base. Good to go. All right, here's a nice close-up view of the fuse panel. You have your main positive from the battery coming in on the right, and your main negative coming off from the left. These 2 positives coming off the top are actually going to the back of the switch panel, and then all the components positives go into the switch panel, and all the component negatives come into this negative bus on the left side. So that way your switch panel interrupts that positive connection in the circuit and turns it on and off when you flip the switch. And there are the 2 blade fuses that are in on those 2 positive leads. There it is all together. So now we've got power to our switch panel. There's our USB charger. This is the bilge pump. You can hear that. The live well pump. And then we've got our navigation lights. There's the white navigation light in the back. And you can see the red and green up front. There we go. Now, as for the lights up front here, I didn't show a whole lot of that, but it wasn't super interesting. I drilled a small hole in the front of the boat there, in the aluminum, underneath the decking, so it went into that cavity that's under this top platform. I did that on both sides. Then I used some marine silicone, the 3M 5200 in white, and filled in the hole. And then all I did was run both of those wires together and then attached it to the positive lead for my power supply. back down the center of the boat, into the battery compartment, up the channel, all the way to our switch panel. Same thing for the negative, and then tied them both into the switch panel up front so that it's on this last switch. All right, and if we hop up front in our middle compartment here, we've got our trolling motor battery and our main shutoff for that, so we can turn that on, and that will give us power to our Minn Kota trolling motor. I covered up this access panel here with just some spare aluminum, some rivets, little rubber grommet in there for our power. She's ready to go. Thanks for tuning in to this one, everyone. We are in the home stretch. Next video, hooking up the outboard. Then get this thing on the water for some tests. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one.